Lord again. Okay, thank you. Nandito na po tayo sa ating pangalawang part ng ating session. Just like what we did on our first session, we will start our afternoon session with welcome remarks from someone who's been supporting Learn, particularly in his efforts to help in organizing the domestic workers. Um, I'm talking about the DGP-BW, no? This group supports our efforts in organizing the domestic workers, hence their generous support and assistance for this project, particularly this OT training. Um, Friends, let us welcome Susan Ludwig for her solidarity message. Welcome, Susan.
Right, yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Anna. It was really a pleasure to be able to speak here. I mean, I would have loved so much more to be with you together wherever you are, and because in the last project I was able to be at the beginning of the first session in Manila, which was really a big experience for me. Unfortunately, we all know the situation. The situation is as such that we cannot sit together in person. I mean, at least some of you can, but we cannot, all of us cannot sit together, and I can't join you for the training. So we have to rely on the techniques and on Zoom, but it's nice to see you nevertheless. Because being abroad and being with you was always the best moment of my work. It's always the best moment to join the efforts of our projects that we are doing. The DGB Bildungswerk is the confederation of the German trade union, and it's the education center. And really, I'm so proud that we were able to do something to support this project, because it's one of the most important projects that I think we have. And here and there, domestic work is work, and there should be no doubt about it. This is recognized as a common knowledge, but we know unfortunately it's not, and it's also not in our country. We still have problems getting care work, getting domestic work, acknowledged work. So the situation is not as it should be everywhere, and there should be much more, and domestic workers, they deserve much more just being recognized as workers. They deserve to have a decent workplace, decent pay, respectful treatment, decent housing. We know, and you're so much better than me, that in many places this is not the case. Waiting for governments to step in has proven pointless, because they're not interested, and other organizations are not interested, other institutions are not interested, but there are some that are supporting you. And but it's in particular difficult if you're working in a country of which you are not a citizen yourself. So organizing is the key. In practice, it is not an easy road to turn to, but however, I think it's the only way that works. And as I started at the beginning, I'm so pleased that we could support Learn and Centro in doing this important work of supporting you now in the 5th year. So we started already some years ago. We had 3 years of very successful and fruitful work together. And I'm happy that we continue with this for the next 3 years. So we support you, that you pursue the route and strengthen you and organizing in the countries where Filipino domestic workers work. So it's really great to see you here, eager to learn and willing to promote the cause, to stand up for your rights and do the needed, although it might be a personal challenge. Nevertheless, it should be a rewarding challenge. And one of the most pleasant experiences, or at least most special experience, most moving experience, really was sitting in Manila together with the people that have been trained in the phases before, after 3 years of the project, and listen to them, hearing what have changed in their life, what have changed in the life of others when they really were doing the work they were doing, and they put what they learned into practice. And yeah, this was so moving, really moving, and I had a lot of tears in my eyes as well, because it was also very emotional. But yeah, as I said, this was really, really a very special moment in my life. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for dedicating your time. Thank you for making it happen again, because you are the one who will make the change. Without you, our work would be pointless. So I hope you have a very successful and fulfilling time this day, the rest of this day and the coming days. And I would like to thank all those that have made this happen the 3 years before. And I would like to mention Jen, Nice, Joshua, Sheila, Giselle, Mary Ann, all those that have dedicated their time for this beautiful project, also with the support of IDWF. And I know you learn a lot, and you will go a very rough but a very fulfilling road. Thank you very much for doing what you do.
Thank you very much, Susan. Could we please ask Miss Jen to have some short response? Yes, ma'am, okay lang po ba?
Ikaw talaga, Ala. Hi, Susan.
Ludwig. Nandun sa paper ka.
Yeah.
Susan.
Thank you very much for that inspiring
Nandito pala.
talk, Susan. It's inspiring us even more, encouraging us even more to make better every year, every day, to make this project more relevant to all the Filipino migrant domestic workers and to all the domestic workers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Jen. Angie, si Sir Rex ay kinakailangan niyang makaalis ng 3 p.m. So, bato ko na sa'yo.
Okay, sige. Thank you, Susan, for that very inspiring message. And yes, we will proceed now to the program for this afternoon. So after we had our preliminaries in our morning session and some input on online journal, which you will do after this session during your asynchronous time, we will now proceed to the program this afternoon. We will have an input, an active discussion on what are the laws, what are the international and national instruments. Ano yung mga batas? I will speak in Tagalog and I will let Ala to translate it for Susan. Ano yung mga batas na nangangalaga at pumoprotekta para sa ating mga Filipino migrant domestic workers or sa mga migrant domestic workers sa kabuuan. And para dyan, we are lucky this afternoon. Tayo po ay maswerte na tayo ay sinamahan ng isa sa mga batikang, idol. Isa to sa mga idol ko. Kasi simula na nagsimula po ako sa migration advocacy, lagi ko na pong narinig yung pangalan niya kahit ko pa siya nakikita. And for sure, siya ay malapit din sa inyong mga puso dahil siya ay nakasama niyo po sa mga naging advokasya, mga activities nyo in the past and until now. So without further ado, let me introduce po to you. Allowed ba ko, Kuya Rex, sasabihin na siya po ang National Project Coordinator ng Safe and Fair Program ng International Labor Organization. So let me please welcome Sir Rex Varona. Palakpakan po natin siya.
Okay, magandang hapon. Even if I don't hear the clap, I'm really happy to see you all again virtually. Yeah, I miss all of you. These times normally we have our big organizing work, used to be in Hong Kong and Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries. So unfortunately, in Manila, we are having a resurgence of COVID. So it's a bit more difficult now, but we are happy that, and thanks Susan, thanks Jen and Centro and IDWF, and of course Learn, and all of you for joining. This afternoon, I'll try to give a bit of a framework. Now, as Ala and were saying, gusto natin mag-organize, we want to organize. And normally when we approach our fellow domestic workers, we tell them, you know, you have the right to join organizations, you have the right to protect yourself. So if I'm going to tell you, said who? Sino may sabi? Who gave you the rights? You know, you're just visitors in our country. You work here. You should be thankful that you have worked in Hong Kong or Singapore or Malaysia. So you don't have those rights. So in order for us to organize and be able to confidently tell our fellow domestic workers and migrants that our rights are recognized and guaranteed, we have to know why. And that is my purpose this afternoon. No? I have copies of the presentation, so you can get the copies later for you to study. I will not explain all of the, it's a bit technical now because coming from ILO, of course, we have to convey some of the international standards, that's what we call them. Sorry, nag-iba ako ng some change my hats now. I used to be one of your organizers before, but now I work with ILO. But I'm happy because now we can institutionally continue, and hopefully we can continue also to work with you in the future. So this afternoon, what I will try to do is to give you a framework of why your rights are guaranteed wherever you go. No? And for that, I'll explain a little bit on what the United Nations and the ILO labor standards say. But as I said, you know, when you are free, please Google, because you know how to search the internet already. Please read the laws that I will be telling you. Can I share my screen? Okay, so in my usual way, you can see my screen now.
Opo.
Okay, so let me just start. Okay, Ala and colleagues are telling me that many of you are new or organizers, and I saw your expectations. So I'll give you a little bit of what are the trends on the deployment of Filipino migrants. And then therefore, what are the standards that protect migrants, and why can you therefore say to fellow domestic workers that our rights are guaranteed, and what are the Philippine laws that can further help enhance this? Okay, so and then just raise your hand to raise questions along the way. Again, please do not memorize because you can read the details in your free time. I'm just showing you a graph of the situation of COVID in the Philippines. This is just to tell you that in the coming months, I think it might still be difficult for you to go home, and your families might be therefore expecting you to give some support, because the Philippines now is among the Asian countries, even in the Middle East, has the one of the highest rates of transmission. That's why we went into strict lockdown again starting on Monday. No, but that is not my topic. The other information is, I've shown you this graph before. This is the economic and other employment indicators of the Philippines from 1970s until now. No, the one on your right hand is the current year. This is 2015 to 2016. What I'm showing you is the situation is getting worse. In the past years, the debt situation, this is the blue line above, has been improving. That's why it's going down. No? Kumukonti yung utang natin sa labas. The economic situation was improving, and then the unemployment situation was also improving. But now, especially after COVID, the last few years, we have seen a drastic change. And if I enlarge the last few years, the last 5 years, especially with COVID, you will see that the red line here is the economy. it has declined more than 9%, meaning to say umimpis, no, lumiit yung ekonomiya natin, and unemployment and poverty incidents have increased. And of course, the debt, yung utang, also increased because government has been borrowing not to give relief and financial aid. What does this mean to you? You might have to work longer abroad, not because the situation in the country is getting worse in terms of going back home, and your families therefore might depend more on you. This graph shows you that in the last few years, the deployment between last year and this year has dropped more than 30%, meaning to say if last year we sent more than 2 million, this year we only more than 1 million OFWs were able to go out. In one way, that's good, no, because less people are going out. But on the other hand, it's bad because it's because of COVID that the migrants cannot work. So you're lucky if you're still abroad and have your work, because more than 500,000 have already returned. Now OFWs have already returned to the country. So that means some more unemployment facing our people in the Philippines. Okay, so this other graph, and will show you that in the past 10 to 15 years, the green one are the domestic workers, elementary jobs. Majority of those who go out every year before COVID, and I think even after, are domestic workers. So it's your colleagues who are continuously going out. That's why it's a big opportunity for you to organize. No? Because many of the Filipinos who go out are actually in the domestic work jobs. I'm not sure if other speakers have already covered this. But yeah, just to give you a context of why you need to organize and why you need to reach out to your fellow domestic workers. And you will also see that in the past 5 years, majority of those who go out are women. No? So you are not alone. That means because many of the domestic workers who go out are women. I'm explaining all of this because these have implication on what laws, international or national, you can use to help protect you. No? And this one I've also shown you before. Sorry for all the spaghetti and all the graph now, but you can study it later on. I just want to show you that the reality is like this. That this is the percentage of women among the OFWs. Many of the women, more than 80%, work in the domestic work area. Now, and that is why they are the biggest community that we are organizing, and we are happy that IDWF, Centro, Learn, and the colleagues are organizing together with you. This is very gender specific because the work where men below at the bottom are majority are the work in the factories, the work of the skilled workers. So that's why many in the services, many in the domestic work are women. The implication to us is many of those who are displaced by COVID are therefore coming from the women sector now because of the nature of the work. We have always shown this. This is before COVID. The face of abuse and violence among OFWs is a woman. This is the data of the government on repatriation, on distress, on trafficking, and you will see that more than 70%. In the case of trafficking, more than 90% of the survivors are actually women. So not only are the precarious work focusing on women, but also the abuses and to victimize the women. And that is why, and even in COVID, this is the statement of the UN Secretary General, that the impact on men and women are different. It's normally worse for women. In terms of displacement, non-payment of wages, difficulties in repatriation, could not find work when you return home. Now, and even violence against women tend to increase during times of crisis. Yeah, so I hope all of that give you inspiration why it's important for us to organize. That what you are doing is not only for yourself, as many of you were saying in your expectation, but actually it's helping your community. No, a single abuse to any worker anywhere is a threat to all the workers everywhere. So an abuse to any single woman migrant is a threat to all of the women migrants. So it's good that we organize and empower ourselves. Yeah, so that's the situation. When we therefore say let's go out and organize, hopefully after COVID we will be more free to do face-to-face or even online. What gives us the right to do that? Yeah, so the statement I'd like to give in the succeeding slides is the rights that you have to organize is guaranteed under international law. So when I say international law, it's United Nations since 1940s, now from the Declaration of Human Rights up to the most recent one, Convention 189, and many other conventions that we are campaigning for. Now, especially the Migrant Plus, I know you have been campaigning for C-189 and many other conventions. Yeah, so the international treaties guarantee that, and that is why it is not negotiable. Your rights are not because the country where you work are very kind and therefore they give it as a privilege to you. That is not the case. No, your rights are basic, meaning your right goes with you, whether you are in the Philippines or you go to another country. No? And when we say your rights are guaranteed by international law, what are these laws? Now, what are these laws? Now, before I proceed in describing the laws, sana I wanted to have an exercise with you, pero I think it's difficult to do this on an online setting. I wanted to raise some questions and I wanted you, sana, to answer. I could not do this in Menti because also I think not everyone is holding a device. So I will just skip,
Sir,
sorry.
okay lang po kung ano yung sa tingin nyo ay pamalit nyo doon sa Menti.
Actually, what they can do is they can write on a sheet of paper and then show. But I think that we'll spend more time on that. Anyway, I just leave the screen to you when we give the copies. But I wanted to raise some questions on when you encounter certain situations, in this case during, let's say, recruitment. No, and for example, this is a question I wanted you to answer. Like, if you are planning to go abroad and you go through a recruitment process, which of the following statements do you agree with? Number one, letter A is that I should pay all the placement fees that the recruiter is asking. B, I will only pay if the recruitment fee is a small amount that I can afford. C is I will not pay any placement fee, and D is I should take out a loan or mortgage my house so that I can pay the placement fee. So among A, B, C, or D, which of the statements do you agree with? So I will not be able to see you because I'm flashing my screen.
Siguro po we can ask our participants, sila Ate Sheila, yung ating mga moderators,
Sige, at least a few of them.
someone to respond.
Sige, okay. So, sige, so if we're going to ask you which of these four statements would you agree with?
Direct sasagot yung mga kasamahan ko dito. Ako susunod.
Sige, okay.
Kami po, Bill.
Sige, go ahead. I could not see you, but okay lang, sige.
In Hong Kong po, ang sagot po namin ay Bill. Ang sagot ko dito ay C.
Okay, so the Hong Kong group says, yeah, the answer is C. Okay, we could not go around the countries now, so sige, let's take the Hong Kong answer na lang.
Malaysia also said yes.
Said C.
See, okay, yeah. This is one example of why it is important to understand international law. Yes, because the correct answer should be C.
Yes.
Because under international laws, then it says that especially for domestic workers, the placement cost should not be charged to the worker. If there is any cost, the employer should pay for that.
Yes.
And especially for the Filipinos, then our local national law is aligned with the international standard, saying that recruitment fees should be paid by the employer. by the amo but not by the domestic worker. Yeah. So this is just an illustration that understanding the international standards help in our organizing, because when our fellow migrants ask us now, why are we refusing to pay placement fee, then we know the reason. We know how to explain. Okay. Yeah, so I have other questions, but I'll skip that now. I think I just wanted to illustrate that it empowers us to know that international law gives some guidance and about how we can actually assert our rights. Okay? Sige, so I'll skip the other questions na lang, and you can do that in your free time. So I've said that there are international laws. So what are these? Now, again, you don't have to memorize, but in general, you can focus your attention as an organizer on two sets of laws. Yung isang grupo ng mga batas na international ay ang ginagawa ng United Nations, no? Yung isang grupo naman ay yung ginagawa ng ILO, yung organization namin. So, sa unang grupo, no, on the United Nations instruments, dahil batas ito because the countries including the Philippines have actually signed, no, and agreed to follow these international laws. So what you need to remember is there are 9 sham, no, core treaties, meaning to say all countries in the world are supposed to report to the United Nations whether they follow this. So as an organizer, when you say that migrant workers and women and domestic workers are protected by United Nations laws and the international treaty, so you should remember the 9 treaties. I will not explain each one. You can read this in your free time, but you will see this number 4. Number 1 is on
Parents,
yes.
hindi po kayo nakashare.
Ay, di ba? No, sorry.
Hindi po.
Wait. Thanks for alerting me. Can you see me now?
Apa.
Okay. So, sorry, I think I got cut off when I was doing that. Okay. So, ang sabi ko kanina, there are, pag UN, remember the 9 international laws, no? So, the first one is on civil and political rights. Ito yung may karapatan bakit tayo pwede mag-organize. Now, why we have absentee voting? Because it's guaranteed internationally that we maintain our political rights. To organize, to assemble, to complain if there are problems. And the second one is on economic and social rights. That's why we have the right to have wages, proper wages, decent work, to return and go home to our countries, and even to migrate to other countries to work. Yeah, so these are part of the guarantees of international law. And the third is on racial discrimination, elimination, yung sabi natin, because we are foreigners, then it is not acceptable that we are treated less than other people in society. So if you're in Hong Kong or Singapore, because you are a Filipino, it is not correct that they should abuse you or treat you worse, no? Because you're of a different nationality. And of course, we know very well CEDAW, that because you're a woman, it should not be the reason why you should be paid less or that you should be treated worse than men or other people because of your gender. Yeah, and of course, number 7 is what is very important for us, because one of the 9 core conventions of the United Nations says that migrant workers and our families have basic rights. No? So, and that is why when we say that the protection of Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, of the migrants is a matter of international duty. This is because of these conventions, now CEDAW and number 7 ICNW, Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and Members of Our Families. No? So the other conventions, you can read that. Ang mahalaga lang, what we are saying is at least half, no, of the 9 are important to migrants because they guarantee our rights. So that's what I was saying earlier, na the protection of the rights of migrants is not an accident, that it is along 1940s pa lang until now there are international laws that guarantee. May ibang UN conventions pa that are important. I'd like to flag number 11 and number 12. You will always hear these. They are called the Palermo Protocols kasi they were signed in Italy, in Palermo, in Italy, around the year 2000. These are the protocols on trafficking and smuggling. So that's why when we say now that illegal recruitment resulting in forced labor or trafficking because you were deceived into working abroad, either for sex or for forced labor. That is part of illegal practice that is stated in international law. So when they tell you what law is that, then you can say the Palermo Protocol of 2000 on trafficking says that. Yeah. So again, you can read this, but I'm just giving a list of where to find and what international laws to find. Okay. So I hope hindi kayo nalulunod. Do not be intimidated by this. You can read what is contained in this, so Google them. I'm just showing you that these treaties define what are the abuses that should not be done and what are the protection that the migrants, especially the women, that means including domestic workers, can avail of. Okay? So, that's on the part of the UN. On the part of ILO, ang kaibahan ng UN is lahat ng tao. Ang sa ILO naman, ang standards ng ILO pertain to the workers. And since your domestic workers are workers, then you are covered by ILO standards. No? So, kung sa UN there are 9, in ILO there are 8. So then you should also remember na may 8 particular treaties that protect workers all over the world. No? And ang mahalaga dito, ito yung first two, abolition of forced labor, Convention 29 and Convention 105 of ILO, which says na kung pula yung nakasulat, the Philippines has ratified this, and that therefore the Philippines is very good at ratifying, meaning may obligation, no? The Philippine government has obligation to fulfill this one. So Convention 29 and Convention 105 says na yung if domestic workers or any worker is put in a situation na you're indebted about that bondage, or your employer confiscate your passport, or you could not have a day off, you could not leave the place where you work, and you're forced to do whatever the employer says, then that can constitute, or if you work almost very long hours without rest, then this combination of factors can actually constitute forced labor. Forced labor meaning to say that then they are violating some of the most fundamental, pinaka-basic na standards ng ILO. Ang implication nito, these are treaties that are actually reflected in the labor code, no, and in the laws of the Philippines, and ideally also in Hong Kong or Malaysia. So that is why it helps us. Also, Convention 87 and 98. Ito yung ginagamit nyo as organizers. Why do you say that in Malaysia or in Hong Kong or in Singapore you can organize even if local laws tell na hindi pwedeng mag-unionize independently, halimbawa yung migrants, but you can join the local unions? It's partly because of these conventions, no? Because Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries, including Hong Kong, are parties to these conventions. So we are using this na yun yung dahilan why do we have the right to organize, no? And that's why you are an organizer, because we want them to maximize this. Okay, so I will not explain the others, you can read this. And in addition to the 8 ILO conventions, we are also campaigning for these other important ones. And you will see below Convention 189. Now, because the Philippines has ratified this, this pertains to you, the domestic workers. And that's why this is very important, as you know in your previous training, that Convention 189 says that domestic work is work. Yeah, that's why we don't call ourselves maids or servants or helpers. We call ourselves domestic workers because of this convention. At dahil dito, then all other international treaties of ILO that cover workers cover domestic workers. No? So, yun yung kahalagahan niya. And again, the other conventions on 97 or 143, this is for migrants, have been ratified by the Philippines. Convention 181 on employment agencies, hindi pa siya, the Philippines has not yet ratified this. So you should have been campaigning. And last year, 2019, 2 years ago, the newest Convention of ILO, Convention 190, was adopted. This is on violence and harassment. And this is particularly helpful for you kasi as I said earlier, the face of abuse among OFWs is a woman. So if Convention 190 is ratified by many countries, then you can use that again also to protect you. Okay? So I hope these two sets of laws, madami pa yung ILO, no? Ang sabi nga natin, the latest one is Convention 190. Ibig sabihin, from Convention number 1 to Convention 190, ganun na karami ang treaties. Convention number 1, if you care to ask, in 1919, is on the hours of work. Kaya sinasabi natin, the standard of work of any worker, including domestic worker, is 8 hours. Yun nakalagay sa Convention number 1. Yeah, and that is why if you work more than 8 hours, ibig sabihin nun you're working overtime, but then you have to negotiate. And that is one reason why we want to organize. No? Kasi many of these international laws, hindi siya mangyayari. They are on paper, but you will not be able to realize them if you are not campaigning for them. Kahit yung Convention 189, di ba? This is specific for you, for domestic workers, but if you don't fight for it, if you don't campaign and tell Hong Kong government or Malaysia or Philippine government to implement it, then the treaty will only remain on paper. Okay? So yun yung pangalawang message ko. So the first message is your rights are guaranteed under international law and nobody can debate that. The second message I want to convey to you is you have to fight to implement, because the laws are only on paper. So it is important. So again, you can read what is contained in each of the law, Convention 97, 143, 189. I will not explain each one of them. But it is important that you fight for these international laws para ma-reflect sila sa local practice at sa local national laws ng mga bansa of the countries where you work. No, and this is a hard fight. Sheila and others, no, I told you, I've been with the migrants movement since 1990s, and yung fight namin in Hong Kong to stop the 2-week rule, until now, is still a fight, and that's how long it takes to fight for many of the laws. Ang Convention 189, if you care also to ask, it took the ILO more than 50 years, almost 100 years, between 1919 to 2019 to adopt Convention 189. So it can take a decade, no? More than 50 to almost 100 years for some of these laws to be adopted. But the important thing is if we continue to fight, then we'll be able to realize this. Yeah, and as I was saying, the laws na nilista ko, they will not be implemented unless they are ratified. And you will see this is a table of the countries in Asia. And at the top of the list, at pinakamataas, the Philippines has ratified the most number. This is a reflection of how active we are in the labor movement, in the migrants movement to fight for the conventions. So that is good. What is not good is if the international conventions, the international law is not implemented at the local level. No, but the important is may ruler na tayo, we have a reference. So it is the implementation that we have to fight for. Okay, so your country, the Philippines, is a good example in terms of building the organization of migrants so that we can continue to fight. Now, I'm flashing the other names of other instruments. Ito sila mga non-binding, meaning to say they are not as required for the country to report, but you will hear this when you organize or when you attend international meetings. So I'd like to mention them na para pag narinig nyo, when you hear them again, hindi kayo mabigla. You will constantly hear that there are, let's say, SDG, no? Sustainable Development Goals. We'll also hear GCM, Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Migration. These are United Nations treaties din, pero sila non-binding. Hindi sila gaya ng lista kanina that the countries report regularly. Ito, medyo voluntary yung commitment. No? And so again, you can read what are these treaties. You have copies of these. So in your free time, please read these so that you understand what GCM is, what SDG is, no? Because they are part of what your country, the Philippines, and Hong Kong, and Singapore, and Malaysia are trying to implement also. So kung makakita kayo ng chance, let's say in SDG, you will see that goal number 5 is on gender equality. And then goal number 8 is on decent work. Yeah, so all countries are trying to achieve this. So yeah, if therefore in Singapore, in Malaysia, you say that the treatment of the migrants are not consistent with gender equality, then you can pressure the government to hopefully do something better now for the migrant, especially the women. Okay, so you can read all of this because the documents are available on the internet. Just to guide you that these are the materials here. I was saying earlier that the UN and the ILO conventions are important, but unless they are implemented locally, including in the Philippines, then you will not be able to achieve them. So one way that the Philippines is implementing yung mga decent work ILO standards is in the Decent Work Country Program of the Philippines. Ito parang commitment, action plan ito ng Philippine government. No? And Centro and other trade unions are engaged with this, and the ILO is also engaged with this, so we can pressure the government to implement our recommendations on how to implement rights at work, the organizing, reintegration and employment opportunities in the Philippines and abroad, our retirement and social protection, and then right to organize and to be represented in policy making. Yeah, so may implementation plan therefore in Philippines through the DWCP. Okay, so when you hear constantly that you have the right to decent work, ang definition ng ILO and the international community, it is composed of 4 elements. Now, when you say that domestic work is decent work, then it has to fulfill this one. The number 1, you have productive employment, meaning to say you have proper wages. Number 2, that you have the right to organize. Yan. Kaya nga may training kayo in organizing, di ba? So if Hong Kong claims that it is fulfilling decent work commitments under ILO, then they have to prove that in addition to your contract as domestic workers, they allow you to organize. And then that number 3, you're protected, may health insurance kayo, you have unemployment insurance, you have retirement benefits. No? And then number 4, that you're represented in policy making, especially in your home country. Okay, so yun yung definition ng decent work. So you will encounter a lot of that. You'll also encounter fair migration principles. In that context, pag sinabi natin na fair migration, kaya ko tinatanong kanina yung recruitment placement fee, kasi it will be fair migration only if the recruitment practices are fair and ethical, meaning they don't charge fees to domestic workers, halimbawa, and there is no human trafficking, no? And then the cost is paid by the employer. That's what I was saying, there are international standards that actually define and guide your rights. Okay, so again, you can read other principles. Even in COVID, we have standards that the governments have to follow. Okay. So I have a few other questions before I go to the national laws. Pero again, I'll skip that kasi wala tayong oras. I'll just go straight to after the international laws, the country has to implement. Now, so ASEAN, because Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia are part of ASEAN, they have conventions and treaties now that they sign. So again, I will not explain the list is here. And then we have bilateral agreements between the Philippines and Malaysia, Philippines and Singapore, etc., which promise to protect you. Again, you can therefore use that to say that the domestic workers have to be protected. And finally, the Philippines has several laws that are supposed to protect you. Ang problema ng Pilipinas, you are outside. No, and then the Philippine laws can only operate within the Philippines. Kaya ang sa abroad, it operates through the embassy or the consulate. Now, but nevertheless, ito again yung lista, I will not explain each one of them. But you will see that many of the laws actually protect you against violence. So we have an anti-violence against women law. Kaya your family members in the Philippines and you abroad are protected by this. Violence meaning not only sexual violence, physical violence, psychological, no, verbal or emotional, but even economic abuse. So pag hindi kayo sinasahuran, that can constitute economic violence, no, or withheld yung sahod, or you are not able to find work. So these are laws that are operating in the Philippines, the anti-trafficking laws also. Yeah, that's why we are saying that, if in cases of trafficking, then if you can help report them, the Philippines has to act on that because we have an anti-trafficking law. There is a law on the rights of women, Magna Carta of Women. So this is whether you are FW or not. If you're a woman, then the Philippines is supposed to do something to help you improve your life, no, even abroad or when you return. And then there are laws on domestic workers. That's why you are working with United. So again, if you're a local domestic workers, similarly, you're protected against violence and you have rights that the government has to uphold. And then recently, there is the Safe Spaces Act. Now that says that even in public spaces, when you're in the airplane, when you are traveling, when you're on rest day, if somebody harass you physically or sexually, then there's a law to do something against that. This is in the Philippines, so it is not applicable to Malaysia or Hong Kong or Singapore. But then if it happens to you, then you can ask the help of the embassy or the consulate. Okay, so I'll end with that, and I hope you don't sleep. You didn't sleep, but my parting message therefore is, what is important is the rights are guaranteed, number one. Number two is you have to organize so that you can advocate and fight for these rights. Okay, and I'll end with that, and therefore say that we hope that the unions of the domestic workers will become bigger and stronger, and you will have a global network or alliance so that then together, now we can realize many of these. I think the lesson also is many of this is a product of the fight of the people before you. So the role of your generation is actually to help implement them and continue the fight so that we continue to protect ourselves and gain our rights. So thank you very much. Back to you, Ange and Ala. Thank you.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Sir Rex Varona, na nag-discuss ng mga importanteng provision, international and national instruments para po pangalagaan or i-ensure yung ating mga karapatan. So alam po natin na medyo hindi siya ganun kadali na intindihin. Ako nga po, 2018 pa hindi ko pa yan masyadong kabisado. So it's a continuing process. Kung ang isang convention pinapasa po ng 100, na ipapasa ng 100 years, so marami po tayong panahon para pag-aralan yung mga ganung batas. And now we will open the floor para po sa mga katanungan. Sabi nga ni Sir Rex, rights are guaranteed. However, it is our role, atin pong obligasyon, responsibilidad natin na ating magamit at maproteksyonan tayo ng mga batas na ito. So, i-open po natin ang virtual floor, para po sa inyong mga katanungan. Nagulat si Rex, nandito ako. Si Rex po ay kasama ko sa institutionalization ng MRC. No? May mga engagement po kami sa mga local government. So yun.
Bigyan ko ng konting space yung pagkagulat ni Rex na makita ka. May idadagdag lang ako, no? Para sa mga participants, kung napapansin niyo dun sa ating program flow, after nito, meron po tayong parang reflections in which itatanong natin sa inyo later kung paano natin magagamit yung mga international and national law sa ating pag-organize. Pero bago po yun, talagang sinadya namin na may isa pang separate to open forum kasi parang may pagkakataon kayo na direktang maitanong kay Sir Rex yung inyong mga kung meron talaga kayong mga burning questions na hindi talaga makakapaghintay. At least magagaling po mismo kay Rex yung mga sagot. Sige mga kapatid, go!
Okay po. Salamat, Ala. So, ibubukas po natin ang virtual floor, ang hapag, para po sa inyong mga katanungan, for your questions. Sorry. I think Ala will translate for Susan. Okay. So, please go ahead. Sino pong unang matapang na Kuya Rex, andito rin po ang Macau. Kasama rin po natin ang PLU Macau ngayong hapon. Nag-hi sila sa'yo. Virtual hi sila sa'yo. Ayan. Okay. So, anyone po?
May tanong.
Hawakan lang po ang mikropono. Kuya Rex, ako.
Para maging medyo contest ito, unahin natin, no? Kumbaga, sino sa Hong Kong, ganyan.
Okay. Sige. Dahil unahin natin siya.
Inabot ko pa noong mga year 1995.
Sandali. Gusto nilang malaman ano daw yung
Sa mga law.
dapat na itanong, saan part siya, kahit na saan ba sa presentation or any question na gusto nilang itanong sa kanya kasi
Sige, any
lalo
question?
na si Rex na
Any question daw?
1990s pa yan.
So, binigyan niya po kayo ng permiso. No holds barred daw po. So, you can ask any question. Personal? Pati ba personal
Wala
question?
personal. When I answer, I'll distinguish whether I'm answering as ILO or I'm answering as myself. No? Kasi baka pagalitan ako ng opisina. Sige. By the way, ILO is one of the United Nations agencies. And as I've said, we are focusing on workers. Kaya, and part of our tripartite structure, yung Centro and the trade unions are constituents of ILO, yung employers then, yung recruiters, and of course, government and civil society. So, that's why we work together with you. Sige, so, no holds barred. Any question kung if I can answer? Thanks.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
meron din sa dito sa Hong Kong. Trina?
Go!
sige po.
Narinig niyo ba?
Opo, loud and clear.
May question lang po ako paano po nami-monitor ng ILO ang bawat organization na ma-implement po nila yung ganitong batas para po sa mga migrant workers?
Good. Thank you, Trina. Good question. Sige, pwede siguro mga 2 or 3 questions tayo para isang sagot. So, how can ILO help monitor yung organization?
Parang paano minumonitor ng ILO yung mga batas na ito na nai-implement ba ng mga governments? Parang yun yung gusto niyang itanong. At ano
thanks.
yung ng ILO para doon?
Sige po.
Thank you.
So, we will entertain 2 more questions bago po natin ibibigay kay Kuya Rex ulit ang virtual floor. Any more questions po mula sa ating mga kasama ngayong hapon? Sige po, sa Macau.
Teka,
Nagre-raise po ng hand ang ating kasama, Ate Jazz, Miss Jazz.
Magandang hapon po. Narinig ba ako? Lalapit ako.
Lapit po kayo konti, medyo nag-e-echo po.
Okay po, magandang hapon. Ako po si Lucy at katanungan ko po sa ILO kasi hindi pa po masyadong pulido ang batas ng domestic workers dito sa Macau. And wala talagang pulidong batas when it comes to domestic work. And we've been trying to communicate with the consulate, with the Philippine labor dito sa Macau. Pero sila din ay parang nararamdaman namin na wala din masyadong lakas para isulong sa gobyerno ng Macau ang mga karapatan namin. Ano po ba ang kayang gawin ng ILO? Or kami po ba ang dapat na unang mag-organisa muna para gano'n po ba?
What in answer pa na? Siguro I'll answer that too because they're quite complicated questions.
Okay.
Sige. So thanks. Medyo mukhang seryosong organisador ang mga ito. Thanks so much. No? So that's second questions again, what ILO can do to help push for the Macau government in particular to implement the domestic worker standards in Macau. Sige, yung question mo na in general, what can ILO do to ensure that the standards of ILO or the UN are implemented by the member countries? No, all the countries where you work are members of ILO. Ang problem natin with Hong Kong and Macau is they are not directly represented in ILO because it's China now that sits on behalf of Macau and Hong Kong being part of China. So that's why Beijing actually determines the positioning. But nevertheless, Hong Kong is part, and I think Macau is part of the delegation when they attend ILO meetings. Ang answer ko is, as perhaps Lucy said rightly, it is not ILO that monitors really. It is actually the constituents that reports. So that means kaya critical yung role ng unions. ILO is unique among all United Nations agencies because we are the only tripartite body, meaning to say the workers are represented. And the problem is when the workers are represented, you have to be a recognized union. And that is why, as I was saying, in the Philippines, you are very lucky because Centro and the mother unions where you belong are actually part of the recognized unions in the Philippines now. But in Macau and in Hong Kong, it's the mainland trade union ACFTU that is represented. So you have to convey the message there. Pero being migrant, then what you can do is then to register your positions and your demands through Centro. Now, para Centro can bring it therefore in the tripartite consultations of ILO. May mga monitoring and reporting bodies yung ILO, but as you know, United Nations is, ang sabi nga namin, wala kaming police powers, no? ILO doesn't have a military or an army na if the country violates, then we will go down to the country and then shoot everyone. Just joking. So walang police, so we could not actually force the countries to do what we say. We have pressure and convincing powers. So normally what ILO will do is if we receive your reports through the unions that, let's say, like 2-week rule is still prevalent in Hong Kong or in Macau, there is no protection for domestic workers, we will offer the countries technical support on how to build either dialogue channels or how to facilitate that migrants can be organized. Or I know in Macau during my time, the local unions were sometimes critical. No? Actually, may mga tensions before between the migrants and then the local workers movements, not like in Hong Kong where Hong Kong CTU and FADBU are working together. So ILO can actually help create the space of dialogue. So as Lucy and you are rightly pointing, it is your strength that will determine the balance of power. So if you're bigger and organized and can voice out your concerns, then that helps ILO report and alert the country that something has to be done. Ang siguro may final word also is do not be disheartened if the instruments, no, the laws on paper do not directly personally benefit you. Kasi walang direct mechanism siyang ILO to actually give you personal benefits. The power of the international instruments is to provide a reference, parang ruler, no, to measure so that if the country is parang aligned with international standards. Kung hindi siya aligned, then we hope that the unions and then the social movements will act to expose that. Now, so ang role ng ILO actually is to set the standards. Once the standard is set and it is not complied with, the constituents need to act. And that's the limitation of the powers that we have. Now, so technical powers and standard setting. But again, as I was saying, do not be disheartened because as you see, once the standard is there, it makes our work a bit easier because naalala ko when I was in Hong Kong in 1990s, we were debating actually whether the migrants can unionize or not. Believe me, that was our debate in the 1990s. Or even in Singapore, they were saying that you're foreigners, you could not organize. But now we are not debating that anymore because we have the standards to say that, yeah, you have that right. So it's moving forward naman. Okay, so but please organize and make yourself more powerful. And perhaps that's what Susan and other trade union movements also are doing to give you technical and solidarity support so that when we are stronger, then yeah, we can expose the problem better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. No, very powerful po. It is our role to ensure na yung mga issues natin, yung mga rights natin will be forwarded para matakal, and ILO or UN will provide like a space for dialogue to also raise these issues that we raise sa tamang forum. So, do not be disheartened. Mahirap po. Hindi po siya, yung batas ay hindi nakataga sa bato. However, yung 1990s, no, very inspiring yung scenario ni Kuya Rex. Kung yung 1990s, hindi ko na po sasabihin na elementary pa lang tayo, joke lang po. Kung nung 1990s ay pinag-uusapan pa kung pwedeng mag-union yung mga migrant workers. Ngayon nag-uunion na po kayo. See, gumagapang man siya, pero nangyayari. Kaya po dapat mas palakasin pa natin yung hanay natin at organisahin natin yung hanay ng mga migrant domestic workers para isulong pa o i-implement yung mga batas at mga karapatan natin mga migrant, ninyo pong mga migrant domestic workers. Feeling naman ako. Okay, so very medyo na-adjut po ako
Na-adjut sa mag-organize rin tayo.
Na-adjut ako, oo. Mamaya po lalabas na kami.
And perhaps another two examples now in early 2000 when there was a move by the employers to make pregnancy a legitimate reason for terminating domestic workers. In 2000 yun, sila Sheila yun, we fought against that and we cited CEDAW. Now, under CEDAW, pregnancy is not a disease and therefore it's not a legitimate cause for termination. So that's why that policy wasn't implemented in Hong Kong. And again, on the recruitment, in the past several years, PLU has issued reports and researches on how much the domestic workers are paying, despite the fact na dapat zero fees, including under Philippine laws. So, well, it's not yet zero, but at least that helped actually reduce the cost of recruitment. But we need to continue to fight until then, we could not. Violence is still prevalent, and that is one of the areas that of my work in ILO, have to actually help expose more of the violence against women migrants issues, because we know that since you're working in the household, sometimes these are not reported. So if part of your union work actually is to also give the chance to our members, no, to at least have the confidence to speak out. Of course, you would be afraid to speak out against your employer if they are the ones doing the violence to you. But if the union can help represent you, no, or you can ask somebody you trust in the union to help take you out. I'm not take you out to assist you to escape from the abusive situation. Then that's one way also that the union can help. The government, like in Macau or other countries, even in the Middle East, under Philippine law, they are supposed to have migrant resource centers, OFRCs, that can provide shelter. Now, so kung hindi man ma-implement ILO rules immediately in the country, the local laws of the Philippines actually mandates the POLO, the OWA. Now there's DSWD, now they have a third officer. So under the embassy or the consulate, you have the DFA. No? So they have the ambassador and then the ATN. You have DOLE under POLO or OWA officer, and then you have DSWD through the SWATO, the Social Welfare Attaché. So these three officers actually provide services, and that's why the unions in the Philippines and CMA and others are helping push that the government of the Philippines implement this properly. But on your part of the world, also push the Philippine government to implement this now. Have these officers that can assist you to add to your protection mechanism.
Okay, salamat po. Tigilan ko na po ang pagdaldal. Didiretso na po ako sa magtatanong. Nagtataas po ng kamay ang kasama natin from Ampol, Singapore.
Time check lang, no? 2:38, meron pang enough time para sa 1 or 2 rounds of questions, Sir Rex.
Yeah.
Okay. Please go ahead po. Hindi po namin kayo naririnig. Parang walang audio.
Yung Singapore na yan, ano?
Apo. Wala yata silang audio. Naka-unmute na sila eh.
Wala.
Okay. hindi po natin kayo. Ate Pin, pwede pong patulong sa AMPO, Singapore.
While they're trying to solve it, just to tell you that since this is a series naman of seminars, we hope that since Susan is here and IDWF and Learn and Centro are working together, so I've actually also tell that ILO would be happy to assist along the way and continue to input as necessary. So if you could not answer some of the questions now, perhaps down the line, especially on experiences on organizing, that is not my topic now, and I could not speak as ILO, pero as my old self, now as a part of the movement before, perhaps I can give some personal insights on our experiences 20 years ago. The coming times we can do that.
Okay, nasagot na daw po ni Sir.
Ano kaya yun?
Pwede pong paki-chat sa chat box yung inyong tanong kung medyo may problem po tayo sa audio. So while we are waiting for AMPO Singapore, i-open po natin ang floor para magkaroon ng chance magtanong iba pa nating mga kasama ngayong hapon. Mula sa PLU Macau, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Ang Singapore nagkakaroon sila ng konting technical difficulties.
Macau and Malaysia.
So may nagre-raise po ba ng hand mula sa Malaysia and Hong Kong? Kahit daw po personal, no holds bar daw po. At mahina po yung audio. So ito po yung mga challenges ng online. Opo, go ahead.
Okay, our question actually has been answered by Brother Rex because it has a similar question by the Hong Kong. So yeah, no more questions for you.
Perhaps sige, parang to anticipate perhaps yung questions na what else can you do in terms of organizing. As I was saying, the most important one is your presence. You are there. Kasi seeing, let's say, former leaders, long-time leaders like Sheila, Sel, and others is good because they provide continuity and historical experience. But also seeing the new faces is very inspiring because it means that new leaders are coming up. But that is the power of the social movement. You have to have warm bodies. As I was saying, I was the second generation na nag-organize sa Hong Kong. So if you are the sixth or eighth generation, it means the Philippine movement continues because you are there. So we need constantly to renew the members and leadership. And as any organizer would know, organizing is an up and down game. Sometimes you become smaller, many times you become bigger, members come and go, but never stop. As the unions always say, organize, organize, organize. That's the only way we will sustain. And as I was saying, nothing is wasted. Kasi even if you don't get direct benefits personally, the experiences and then the advocacies that you create actually have opened the space. And that is why what you are doing now has moved actually several steps forward, what we were doing during our time. So the only loss we will have is if you stop. Kasi if you stop, then everyone needs to pick up the pieces again, and then all the work will have to start all over again. So that is why just maintain, and that's, you're right in saying that this is self-sacrifice, and in a way it is perhaps fitting that we're discussing this now because now it's Palm Sunday if you're Catholic. So it's kind of a passion to dedicate yourself in service of others. So please do that because then the younger generation will thank you that during your time you fought for all of this. Because if you did not, then their situation would have been worse. So take that as inspiration.
I agree.
There's may additional comment ka lang kasi ang tanong pala nila ay we just want to know kung pwede nang mag-union in a host country para sa migrants. Bakit dito sa Singapore hindi pa din kami alam? Yung tanong.
Well, this is ILO answering. Under the 8 fundamental conventions I was saying, countries including Singapore and even in the Middle East now are supposed to respect the right of the workers to organize. But as any international treaty would say, it's the sovereignty of the country, ang power ng sariling bansa, yun nag-determine how they do that locally. So in the case of Singapore or many Middle East countries, they say that that the migrants can actually organize, but they have to join the established unions. So in Singapore, I think that's also the process that SNTUC is there, and they are the recognized union that represents all the workers. So if therefore you can join any of their component unions, then that's how they qualify as providing the right to unionize and organize. So it's not uniform in all countries. ILO could not actually force the country to change its practice. But that's one leg of the coin. The other leg is, and I think the Filipinos have pioneered this, organized as a chapter of Centro. Now, because again, that gives you representation back in the Philippines. So not necessarily in Singapore. So NTUC can still pick up your issues if you tell it to them and then dialogue with them, but also make Centro also represent you. So that in the Philippines, you are still represented as a component of Filipino workers. The reason I'm saying that, you will not stay forever in Singapore. Now, many of your issues and agenda remains with the Philippines. The issues of your families here, the issue when you return, the issue of what help you can get from the embassy or consulate. Now, so it's still good to represent yourself back in the Philippines. And my additional point therefore is, as I was saying, you will not stay forever in Singapore. So please prepare for reintegration. And then the earliest you can go home and then sustain your life here and then work here would be better. But as I said at the start, it's difficult at this time. But so do it two ways, parang bibingka, up and down. Now try to dialogue with Singapore or the host country trade unions, and at the same time align or affiliate yourself with the trade union center in the Philippines, so that you don't lose out on representation.
Okay. So I was informed that Singapore is ready to ask question po. Or yun na po yung question. Yun na? Okay, sige po. Okay, so for the last round po, we will entertain the last round of question. Bago natin payagan si Kuya Rex na umalis at magpahinga ngayong linggo. So, last round of question, anyone po na gustong magtanong or mag-clarify? Or Kuya Rex, maybe you can
just
share
give a partnership na lang. Sige.
Pwede daw magtanong.
Yes
Sige.
po.
Yung tungkol po doon sa DOFEL, any updates? Kasi alam namin isa rin kayo yung nandoon dun sa creation of Department of
Overseas Okay, actually I have three updates now. One is on DOFIL, another one is on House Bill 6779, and then the third is on kalimutan ko yung third. ang sa COVID lang na ang before DOFIL, there's a bill actually in the lower house, 6779, which says that it will be mandatory for all OFWs to get vaccination of 13 diseases, so from polio to TB to everything, and you could not go out of the country unless you have all these vaccinations. So we are intervening, we meaning the tripartite, not trade unions and others, and ILO is also doing some resource. We are actually advising the Congress that this is not in line with international standards to make it mandatory. So sabi namin, vaccinations have to be voluntary and based on the informed choice of the person. Kasi for many reasons, sometimes religious, sometimes health, all of these vaccines. So yeah, anyway, Centro and CMA are there. If you have any concerns about this, yeah, we can communicate by email, no, on if you want to bring in your position on this. On the field, you know that in March last year, the lower house already approved it, now their version. So now it's in the Senate, the upper house that is discussing. They have finished the technical working committee meetings, and it seems that there is big support from almost all government agencies. Very few are able to voice their opposition to it. A lot of the question is simply how this affect the OFWs. So, but since I will go back to technical working group inputs, if you have any inputs, please relay them to Centro or to any of your partners to CMA para may habol pa. ILO came out with a statement last week. We can send it to you. Now, essentially, it is saying that we are concerned that in the whole of ASEAN, the 10 countries, Philippines was a model in terms of good practices. So over wholesale change in the governance system is a bit of a concern, especially because the DOFIL will not be under Department of Labor anymore. In all other ASEAN countries, the migration is under the Labor Ministry, which is important so that the right to work or to return is part of the labor policy of the country. So kung mahiwalay na siya, if it is separated from that, then DOLE has its own policy, DOFIL will have its own policy, so who decides? No? And then in ILO, since it's tripartite, who represents the workers? So parang ILO just conveyed these messages, but we hope that the advocates of the bill will answer this, and we will follow up. So again, if you have any updates on that, yeah, just advise us so that we can always also convey to them. Thank you. So yun pala yung updates ko yung dalawa.
Thank you, Sir Rex. No? 10 minutes na bago mag-alas 3, so may time si Sir Rex pa ng konti para sa kanyang parting shot kasi may meeting pa siya ng
Yeah, well, that was my parting shot. Now I'm used to working on Sundays because actually I miss working on Sundays now. Yeah, when I was with PLU and others. But now we have a family video now because it's Palm Sunday, I'm a Catholic family. So yeah, just to catch up to that. Now, but I share all the happiness of all the members here. Na I think we are still a good model of many migrant groups, domestic worker groups in Asia and globally on how we organize and sustain organizing. So my hope is as the new breed of leaders and organizers come on. So yeah, please learn from the past experience, but do not stop organizing because the migrants also change, and do not stop learning. No, many of our experiences are good to refer back, but you have your own experience now. For example, during our time, we are not used to social media. We didn't have experience with online processes, and and social media is not very common. But now, if you can use that, then take it to your advantage. Now, but I think at the end of it, the important thing is really hard work on organizing, talking to the migrants themselves, and representing yourselves in the issue. And I hope that many more. I'm happy also that I don't see him. Out of 100 people, only 1 or 5 men are members of the unions. They were still the leaders or the presidents. So I'm a man that I didn't feel comfortable. So I'm very happy now to see that all of the leaders are women, simply because you're the majority. Now, so please continue to build that kind of power, and so that then at the end of it, we can change some of the things that we want to change. So happy to see you, and happy to continue working with all of you. So thank you, and good luck for our work.
Maraming salamat po, Kuya Rex Barona from ILO, and syempre former kasama natin sa Hong Kong. So maraming salamat po. Bigyan po natin ng round of applause si Kuya Rex sa kanyang pagbabahagi.
I also
See you
applaud
next.
all of you.
See you on.
Balikin na ng Hong Kong, Rex!
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, okay. Anyway, yeah, hopefully we can go around again to the countries and work with you all over. Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Maraming salamat, Rex.
Ingat po. Sige.
Thank you. May meeting tayo bukas, 10 a.m.
Thanks.
Sige po. Maraming salamat po sa atin. Siguro okay lang ba magbigay? Medyo mabigat po ba yung ating naging session? We give like 3 minutes break just for everyone to breathe and medyo makagalaw, medyo baka mas stiff neck po kayo if okay, or 5 minutes to breathe, get water, go to the toilet before we proceed to the final session this afternoon po. Sige, let's
Actually, medyo enough yung time natin. Time check lang. So, okay na okay tayo sa isang short break.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, everyone. Let's get coffee po, mag-CR tayo, toilet, or mag-stretching, chismisan. Sorry, Susan, if I cannot speak.
Susan, no problem. I'm leaving. Can I butt in? Susan, are you staying?
No, I will leave now.
Okay. Just before you leave, I just wanted to know that there are more than 40 participants, individual participants.